Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you all at our first webinar of the third set of webinars that has been prepared by the European Gymnastics Trampoline TC. Let me please introduce myself first. My name is Vladimír Zeman, and I'm a president of the European Gymnastics Trampoline Technical Committee. You may remember we have already provided 6 webinars in 2 sets of autumn 2020. All the webinars have been recorded, and the videos from the webinars are available first on European Gymnastics website, and second on European Gymnastics YouTube channel. For today, our expert is Paul Greaves from Great Britain. Paul comes from our trampoline community and was also a gymnast in the past. Later, he started coaching and reached a really top level as a personal coach of Bryony Page. You may remember she's the Rio Olympic silver medalist. Paul's success within the sport has been recognized by a number of awards, including Young Coach of the Year, British Gymnastics Outstanding Coach, and many others. He is also a sport and physical activity academic lecturer at the Sheffield Hallam University. That means he has also university background and university lecture knowledges. Paul has traveled the world also as a tutor and expert to support developing coaches and gymnasts across the globe. I'm happy to see in the list of participants, some participants from Italy and Ireland, the European countries he was working with. For a long time, he is cooperating also with our European Gymnastics as an expert for the training camps and coaches workshops. And now Paul is with us once again today. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. It's a real honor to work with the UEG, and especially sort of the years that we've been working together. And thank you, Vladimir, for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to come and work with you again.
It is our pleasure first. Second, would you like to say some words before you start your presentation?
Yes, I think it's first of all to acknowledge the strange times that we're in and how we've had to adapt and change how we do things for many of us across the world. But I think if one thing out of all of this strange situation, it shows that how adaptive we are as coaches and how sort of important it is that we do adapt and change as times change. And so I think there's lots of learning from it. There's lots of positives as well as the negatives to take from it. And certainly sort of like this platform of Zoom, how we can connect with one another across the world is phenomenal. So in some ways, where we maybe had the difficulties of travel or of cost in terms of money to get to places and to connect with the people that we wanted to connect with, I actually think we've found a way of overcoming that, which I'd never even heard of Zoom before last year, and now I use it every single day to teach, and I teach across the world as well. So I have students in Brunei, I have students in Hong Kong, I have students in Australia, so again, it's opened up a world of where we can learn in a different way. So from a learning perspective, it's quite an exciting time, but I still can't wait to see everybody in person. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all again in the near future, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. And the floor is yours.
Okay. I'll just share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so today's session, some of you may have done something similar with me before, but it's always good to revise and go over things again and refresh. But we'll be looking today at planning strategy, goal setting, and also a bit of the coaching process, because that's something that's really important in terms of understanding why we're doing what we do and how we do what we do. In terms of planning, we can often see things in terms of very complicated spreadsheets and things like that. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be like that, but it can be very, very simple as well. And depending on the level of coaching experience or the level of gymnast or athlete that we're working with, it depends on the level of detail that we have with regards to what we do with planning. Now, it sounds, whenever you say the words planning, it can sound quite dull and boring. So I try and think of it in terms of goal setting and almost like a roadmap. And that's something that we're going to unpick today in terms of how we can make that sort of a little bit more exciting and more involved in the training process, because it's something that can be really, really motivational and something that can drive our gymnasts forward. It can really help with regards to things like them sort of pushing their own levels and their own abilities, and also them sort of challenging themselves because of the things that we've put in place. So the aim today is to look at the importance of the planning process, of periodization and understanding of the different things that we need to consider, and also look at it from a point of view from an elite sport sort of setting. So it might be quite different if you're working with younger participants, maybe under sevens and things like that. The planning process would be very different. But in terms of like the elite sport, if we plan appropriately, it means that we can get the best out of the people that we work with. Not only that, it also helps with regards to releasing and easing the stress on us as coaches, because we know exactly what we need to be doing, and we need to know who is involved at those particular times. So it sometimes really helps with regards to supporting us as coaches as much as it does to support the athletes that we're working with. We'll look at some of the different areas in terms of the considerations with regards to planning. So we'll look at a needs analysis, because often we can plan and we can discuss things such as routine progression or skill development, but actually planning needs to be so much more than that, and it needs to be all encompassing with regards to the life of an athlete. So we're going to unpick that, hopefully, and try to look at some of the different areas that we might need to consider as coaches if we're to support our athletes to achieve the best that they can be. We'll also look at different methods and also different types of goal setting. So there's different types of goals, things which we may not have considered before. And also in terms of goal setting and planning, look at some of the strategic, and when I say strategic, I mean, in terms of sort of some of the things that maybe we're thinking further down the line. So, for example, you're working with gymnasts now that may be in their teens, and we're thinking way ahead to when they to fully develop. Like, where do we want them to get to? So in some ways, we look at where they're at now, but we're strategically planning to try and support them to achieve bigger and greater things in the future. So people think coaching is simple, and you could say, yeah, it's simple. We know our information, we learn our sports, and we understand how to progress and develop skills. That's a simple way of looking at it. But if we look at sort of a process, for example, this is a model. Frank's 1983 model in terms of the coaching process. Now, when we coach somebody, this is often the process in which it happens. So the athlete performs, they complete their skills, or they complete their routines, or whatever we've asked them to do. We as coaches observe that. The performance or sequence is analysed. We then relate that to what they've previously done, and we make it a sort of an idea of what we need to say to the athletes to move forwards. We then also from that consider what we do in the future. We then plan ahead in terms of what we're going to do, and then the whole process starts again. That's a very simplistic form and a simplistic way of looking at the coaching process. Athlete performs, we observe, feedback, plan for the future, conduct practice again, and the whole process starts again. But we all know it's not as straightforward as that. And we all know that sometimes things can alter, things can change, and things can get in the way. And we also know now that there is some sort of flaws to this process in terms of this model actually looks as though athlete performs and it's all from the coach in terms of the performance that's analysed and in terms of what happens moving forward. However, what we now need to consider is actually what the athlete understands. Does the athlete understand what the coach is observing? Does the athlete observe the same as what the coaches observe? And actually, is the plan right for that athlete moving forward? So again, it's a very simple way of looking at a coaching process, but actually it's much more complicated in person. So if we're looking at the coaching process, and some official ways of coaching process. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's really important to understand what coaching actually is. And if we look at these definitions from Borry and Knowles, a staged coach-athlete process is to improve skill acquisition. That's one very small element of it, absolutely. And in terms of we want to help athletes develop a series of skills and certainly sort of progress, developmentally along the way. We've got another definition in terms of a coach's ability to identify, analyse and control variables that affect an athlete's performance. Again, it's part of it, and it's being able to understand the people that we work with and be able to control sort of the controllables and hopefully progress people through. And then there's the statement of there's no clear or agreed definition of the coaching process. And this is what brings me on to talking to us as trampoline coaches or people involved in trampoline. There's actually no defined clear process of coaching because it's so complex depending on the context of which we're coaching in. And I'll break that down a little bit further. So if you're a coach and you're a coach working with athletes, say for example, that are under 12, the way of which the coaching process happens and the planning process happens is quite different to if you're working with Olympic athletes or world-class athletes, for example. So how might that be different? If I was working with under 12s and I provide a program that is exceptionally well detailed and very meticulous in all that I do for under 12s, actually that could end up not meeting the needs of the athletes that we're working with. Again, at that age group, it might be much more about discovering the type of athlete that they are, making sure that they're still having fun along the way, and also in terms of the stage of maturation and how they grow and develop is very different from an athlete that is fully developed and on the world-class program or the world-class performance level already. So again, in terms of the coaching process, it's actually quite different. Now, if you're talking about teaching, for example, if I'm a teacher of primary school age children or younger children, I'm prescribed what I need to teach them and how I need to teach them. And we have teaching degrees that will help that. But with coaching, it's actually quite different. So how do we know what to do and how do we know what the right thing is to do for each age and stage? And most of that has previously come from maybe how we've been coached or how we've learnt along the way from the people that influence us. But is that fact and is that actually correct and accurate? So that's something that we need to challenge ourselves as coaches. So in terms of the coaching process and the planning process, we recognise the need. There's a need for a systematic approach to how we do things. Now, when we talk about a systematic approach to coaching, we need to think about many different areas other than simply technical coaching, which is often how we're trained. We're trained how to develop a skill and how to progress a skill and how to do that in a safe manner. And that's very important. And it's exceptionally important in terms of protecting the people that we work with from injury, and to make sure that they're safe and developmental and it progresses appropriately. But there are so many different aspects to coaching that we need to think about with regards to the planning process. So in terms of the coaching process itself, we look at it in terms of 4 different areas. It needs to be dynamic. So again, it needs to be challenging. It needs to be organized and well processed in our heads, and also well planned. It needs to be systematic. And when we say systematic, it needs to be sort of an annual plan that we review, not we were doing this plan for the next 10 years, okay, because athletes will probably become very bored, and that we need to challenge people and we need to review lots of times. And also in terms of the coaching process, it needs to be deliberate. So when I say deliberate, what I mean is, why are we doing and why are we delivering the coaching that we are? What's the purpose of it? And that's something that's really important. Now, when I was an athlete, we didn't understand much of this, even though this information was researched back in 1987. Why did we not know about it? Because pretty much most coaching research didn't actually get to the people that it was intended for, which is us as coaches. It stayed in academic frameworks and academic realms that never actually passed on to us as coaches. Now, when we go back and we look at a lot of the research, there was some very interesting and good research done with regards to coaching and planning and periodization, but often it never actually got through to the people that needed to use it. So in terms of some of the other areas, into how it would help and support us moving forwards, it helps, when I say with data collection. Now, depending on which country you're from, depends on how your programs are funded. You might have no funding whatsoever, but data collection, whilst it sounds quite dull, it actually helps us monitor progression and monitor progress for the people that we're working with. So data collection can be from things such as measuring somebody's range of movement in terms of their flexibility. That can also help with regards to planning goal setting, because if somebody needs to work on their flexibility, we've collected the distance maybe in which their body is from closing the shape. You can then set targets and say, okay, in 1 month's time, we want to see a slight improvement. In 2 months' time, a slightly bigger improvement. So that data collection not only helps with regards to us planning, but it also helps with regards to monitoring and progressing people's progress, or, to be quite honest, people's alterations as they grow and mature, because through certain stages of maturation, where people grow and develop, it won't always progress and it won't always increase. There'll be some times where certain areas slightly get worse because of learning how to deal with larger limbs, or the muscles need to be strengthened again because somebody's had a growth spurt. So in terms of data collecting, it also helps with regards to progressive coaching and safe and developmental practice, something which often we don't learn in coaching courses. It also, again, I've already mentioned how it leads on to action planning with regards to helping us understand what somebody needs to do moving forwards. Now, in terms of the last part of that process there with regards to evaluation, it's something that we do have to do on a regular basis in terms of evaluate what we've done and how we've done things in order to make things better and move things forward. So evaluation is a massive part of the process in terms of reviewing, and that could be, I'll give you a practical example. After the World Championships in 2013, I met with my athletes to discuss sort of what happened, how they felt the event went, how they felt the progression up to the event was, and then how well they thought they'd done in the competition. And then we discussed in terms of, did that work? Was it the right amount of routines that we completed before the event? Was it the right amount of training? Did we do too much? Did we do too little? Did we need to focus on other areas? That evaluation process is essential in terms of reviewing what we do, in order to not stagnate and just do the same thing all the time. And I think this is something which is quite apparent in trampoline. If you go through time, we can see the equipment's improved. We can see that as the equipment improves, the athletes progress. They're able to complete more complex and difficult routines and skills because they can jump higher. And you can see over the period of time that there's a progression. So with that, you can't keep doing the same thing of which we've done always, because as things change, we have to change and we have to adapt. We have to evaluate. What is the new equipment like? How is that changing things? What are the impacts on the body? So again, it's really important that we do evaluate on a regular basis. So in terms of critiques of models and coaching models, there's a lot of information out there, but they fail to distinguish the difference between participation and grassroots level, so beginner level sort of athletes, and performance, because it's very different in terms of the planning process of how we do that, dependent on the age and stage of the people that we're working with. There's also an oversimplification of coaching process in terms of, oh, it's quite simple. Athlete performs, coach observes, coach feeds back, athlete improves and progresses. We know now much more about involving the athletes in the coaching process and in the planning process in order to really get the best out of them. Now, in certain cultures, that might be different, and again, it certainly won't be the same for everybody. But one thing that we found effective that works well over here is in the UK is that questioning and challenging people in terms of, how did they feel when they did that skill or that routine? What were their thoughts on it before we impose our thoughts on it? So again, it's not a simple process of athlete performs, coach observes, coach feeds back, athlete improves. Because sometimes, and this is something where it's the perfect platform here to discuss this, sometimes people might not understand what you say. And certainly working at the UEG camps, I could quite easily feed back in my English accent with my English language to somebody from a different country, and they might go, yeah, I understand. And they get on the trampoline and do the same thing that they did before because they really haven't understood what I've said. So again, that process of just feeding back to people, you've got to check for understanding. You've got to see that they understand what is happening. So it's much more complex than simply coach feeds back, athlete improves. There's also things such as the environment in which we create. So we know that people learn best in an environment that they feel confident and comfortable in. So again, for people to thrive and to achieve the best that they can, we need to plan that as well in terms of, who are they training best with? Who might challenge them the most? What's the best environment for that particular person? And that can be quite tricky, especially if we're working with a smaller program or programs where we have less participants. So a simple process to look at with regards to planning, and again, this is a very, very simple process, and it's something that applies along every single level, whether we look at participation and people just starting out, or whether we're looking at elite level, is that we plan, we do, and we review. And this is where it's quite a simple process, and then the complexities of planning change depending on the age and stage, like we've talked before. So with regards to plan, do, review, we plan what we're going to do with regards to, we sit down with the athletes, we talk it through, we deliver, and the athletes, deliver the program, what we've set out, and then we review it. Now, who's involved in that review? Well, that could be a number of people. And I'll probably come on to this a little bit later. Now, certainly with regards to my planning, I used to set out training plans and say, okay, this is going to be the next 6 weeks of training. This is how many skills or routines that we're going to complete. This is the strength and conditioning and the physical preparation that we will do. This is what we're going to do for 6 weeks, and then we'll review it after 6 weeks. That's very much me delivering to my athletes, but so much more went into that planning. For example, we have a phenomenal judge over here in the UK, and a person that has influenced me in such a positive way, Claire Thompson. After events, Claire would sit down with us as coaches and discuss and talk about the athletes' performances. And I would often listen to the feedback which Claire gave, and that would really help inform me in terms of how I plan and how we might need to improve things moving forwards. That's just one example of engaging with judges. I've spoken to people from many different countries. I would very much trust in Vladimir's judgment as a judge, and I would really respect his feedback, and many other judges that I've spoken to as well, and they really contribute as well to some of the planning process. So it's not just simply about technical coaching, it's much more than that. So what age or stage should we have a plan from? Should it be when we very first start out, when they're just very, very young? Should it be as they're developing talents, or should it be when they get to elite level? And quite simply, the answer is we always have a plan, but it just looks different in terms of each age and stage. So I quite like this this sort of a comparison to a sat nav, so a map. Now, back in the day, my dad and granddad, they wouldn't have had all of this technology in terms of how I get to somewhere. So if they were traveling, say, for example, I'm in the middle of England, if they were traveling to London, to the south of England, they would have to open a map, a road map, and say, here's where I want to go to. These are the roads which I need to travel along in order to get to the destination that I want to get to. A little bit like you might do now with regards to if you were coming to the UEG camp, you would go and search for flights. You would look at the best travel options in terms of getting to where you need to get to. You would make sure that you had accommodation and that you had everything that you needed to get there. And then you would travel. You would go to the camp. And then after the camp, you would review it and think about, did I have a good time? Did I, what did I learn from that? So it's very simple when we look at it in terms of things like that. And that's what planning is. It's about understanding where we need to get to and the journey of how we need to get there. Something which we often just take for granted, but something which we do need to make sure that we do with an informed approach. And when I say informed, if you're a less experienced coach, how would you know how to get somebody to this higher level if you've never had the opportunity to do it previously? So that's where you might have people like myself or other people from the UEG, which you can seek advice from or gain support from. So again, planning is very much about where do we need to get to and how do we need to get there, and then plotting little targets along the way. Now, with that, we all know that sometimes, and I'll use the example of trying to get to the UEG camp. We know that sometimes there might be challenges. There might be a delayed flight. There might be something wrong with the transport. There might be an issue with the venue, and we have to change, adapt, and deal with that as it happens. And that's the same when we're planning with athletes, that sometimes things change. They might have a growth spurt when we're not expecting it. They might have an illness or an injury, something that changes. And that's when we have to review and maybe adapt and change the plan and find a different route to get to the end goal of where we want to get to. So it's research and it's evidenced that coaches that do plan provide much more of an effective training environment than coaches that don't plan. And also it prevents things such as athlete burnout. So if we don't plan appropriately, we can often maybe do too much and do too many things at the wrong time, which can ultimately and result in athletes not achieving their potential and ultimately end up in them sort of dropping out of sport, or maybe just never quite making the level that they should have made. And again, that can sometimes, and it's very difficult for us as coaches to acknowledge that. Now, I think about my first group of athletes that I brought through, I did not have a clue what I was doing. I did it with the best of intentions, but I didn't really understand about the needs of athletes. I didn't understand about planning. I didn't understand about maturation and growth and physical development. I didn't understand about psychology and sort of the pressures that athletes feel going into competitions, or how an athlete might excel at a competition because they thrive in that environment. I didn't really understand it. What I did understand was how to progress a skill, how to develop a series of movement patterns in order to do more complex skills. That's what I understood. I understood the trampoline technical aspects. Having been involved in coaching now for, I'm trying to think, 26 years. I can't believe I've just said that, 26 years. So yeah, I'll be 40 this year. So 26 years, I've been coaching since I was 14. How I coached when I first started coaching is exceptionally different to how I coach now. But that's not just because of experience, that's because of knowledge and education and development. And that's something that's really important that we do along the way. So where do we begin planning? Two logical ways. We can either look at where we want athletes to get to and work backwards from that point. So say, for example, we might be looking at, if we talk about the Olympic Games. So with Bryony, you could say we're looking at the Tokyo Olympic Games. We want to look at where we want to be 1 year before, 2 years before, 3 years before, 4 years before. And we can plan backwards in terms of that. So where do we need to be by the Tokyo Olympics in terms of peaking to be the best of your possible performance standards? It's also acknowledging along the way that it won't be something that what we call linear. It won't just be a straight line. There'll be, and trampoline's a perfect example, there'll be ups and downs. There'll be times where athletes perform better. There'll be times when athletes need a bit of rest and recuperation time and be able to sort of relax. And knowing when to plan those things in is really, really important. Now, we did get sort of, a difficult situation with COVID this time, in terms of that impacted all of our plans and nobody predicted how we could do that. But what did we do? We changed, we adapted, and we did what we could with what we had. And again, something where we have to think about it. You might not have written it down, you might not have put it onto paper, but you would have had to rethink things, redo things, and replan things. And certainly something which has challenged us all. We've gone to doing online sessions. We've gone to doing more sort of physical preparation as opposed to technical coaching. Things that we should be doing along our technical program, which sometimes maybe some of us don't because of time constraints and things like that. You could look at where an athlete is currently and think, okay, I'm going to progress the next 6 weeks. So you might not work backwards, you might work forwards. And you could say, okay, in the next 6 weeks, we're going to try and do this to get to an improved level in a certain area. Now, that might not just be from a technical point of view, it could be from a multitude of different areas. And that's what we're just going to move on to now. So if we don't plan, you could end up in the situation like this person here in the maze. You might end up with a successful outcome, and you might get out of the maze and succeed. So you enter the maze, you find the right journey the way through, and you exit the maze. Success. Or you might enter the maze and get completely lost in the maze because you've taken different directions and you've not really planned your route. And I think this is quite a dangerous way of coaching, because yes, plans aren't straightforward and aren't always clear and simple, and we do have to change them along the way. They're not fixed, They're not set in stone, as we say. They're not rigid. They do have to change, and they have to adapt as things change and adapt with environmental factors with training, or physical changes. They do have to change. But if we don't have any plan, we can sometimes be lost. And that's really, really important to acknowledge. So one of the key things with regards to planning and periodization is that we don't just put a plan together that is based upon maybe what we've done in the past. Some of that will be great, and some of that will be very, very important in terms of that experience and knowledge. But actually, we have to make sure that we understand each age and stage of development. And that is not just about physical development, that's also about emotional and cognitive development. Understanding how people's feelings change as they change and grow and develop, understanding how to motivate people at different ages and stages. It's much more complex than simply, like we showed with the first plan, of plan, do, review. There's much more complexities to it. So what do we need to know in terms of planning and goal setting? Now, some of you will have heard this before, and it will be not a surprise. And some of you might think, okay, I've never thought about this in this way before. Now, if you've heard this many times before, that's brilliant. And it's just a case of reassuring that you're doing the right thing. Or if this is something completely new, then it's really important that you go and research and find out about these different areas. So in terms of a needs analysis of things that we need to plan for, there are 5 different areas. There's tactical, technical, physical, psychological, and lifestyle. Now, the impacts that we can have on each of these different areas vary. And when I say vary, I mean they differ in terms of how much we can influence these different areas. For example, technical, we can go and find out and source the information that we need to make somebody technically more excellent. Now, we are here today because most of us are excellent technical coaches or technical specialists with regards to trampoline, and we will know how to develop skills. We might have some different techniques, but generally, most of us will understand how to progress and develop those technical aspects of our sport. Psychological, we might have some people here that are psychological experts. We might have some sports psychologists, but do we really understand how the brain functions and how individuals perform the best? Lifestyle, this is the one which we can least impact on and which we should have the least involvement in. We can offer support in terms of lifestyle. And when I say lifestyle, I mean, as soon as the athlete has left the gym, we have no control or no sort of way of understanding what they do outside of the gym. So we don't know whether they're eating healthily or whether they're getting enough sleep or things like that. That's out of our control. There's not much we can do about that, but we can help people understand what they could do if they want to achieve at top level. And there's physical. Again, unless you understand the human body and how it progresses, how it develops, this is something which we might have just done a normal program of which we did when we were training. And again, that's something that's really important, that we don't just simply apply training techniques that we did. Why are we doing an exercise? What is the purpose of that exercise, and what are we developing? And having an understanding of that is exceptionally important. And then tactical, again, something which we probably think happens more in team sports, such as basketball or football. And you think, right, well, we'll place this player here and we'll put that person at the front here. And, but actually tactical is something that we have to consider as well in our individual sport. So just breaking those down a little bit more, technical, you need to be understanding, from whatever sport you're from. And I'm delivering this in terms of a trampoline specialist, but whatever sport you're from, you need to understand the technical aspects of your sport. Now, that is about learning about things that are factual. So, for example, science has changed. and our understanding of the technical aspects of the sport has changed. So, for example, previously to the techniques that we use now, people used to swing their arms up into skills to take off for rotations. Now we do an arm set and we prep the arms so that the arms are vertical. Why have we changed that? Because we understand now the differences of resistance. We understand the difference, the impacts in terms of the biomechanical effectiveness of those different techniques based upon fact, evidence, and research. Oh, sorry, bear with me. I'll just click back on here. Okay, so we go to tactical. So we think of our sports now. If you've got somebody, a gymnast, say for example, like Bryony. Bryony is taller than most gymnasts, than most trampoline gymnasts. So, and she has a certain style which suits different shapes, for example. So when you're planning a routine, it might be that tactics are a big part of that in terms of thinking, well, actually, these skills look better in this shape with regards to you, or these combinations work better together in this sequence as opposed to a different sequence. So tactics is something which we need to bring into our routine planning, but also in terms of understanding, well, actually, if we do this level of difficulty, then the overall score might be better because the form and the accuracy will be better in terms of horizontal displacement and time of flight than if you did a bigger difficulty. That's tactics. From a physical point of view, again, we need an understanding not just of physical preparation, but also things that will help injury prevention, things that will help prepare the body for the activities in which we're doing, and also the importance of physical rest and understanding that we need to recover and we need to let our bodies and allow our bodies to have that time to heal in between certain overload periods of training. And then psychological, something which often we can not learn about in our coaching sort of journey, but something that's so important. You'll have some people that thrive at competitions. You'll have some people that stress and have anxiety around competitions. And the psychological training that we need to often implement into our training plans is really important in terms of supporting an athlete to achieve success. Now, that might be something as simple as doing a practice competition, but it also might be something in terms of how you go about progressing certain skills. So many people know that people have had skill confusion, or some people call it lost move syndrome. And I would never use the words lost move syndrome. It makes it sound as though something is so much worse. I personally sort of had skill confusion. Now, in terms of how you progress the skills and how you develop them, is there a coaching method that could help prevent that? Personally, I think that there might be. Now, there's some factors which are out of our control, and there's some things that impact on people with regards to outside things that happen which negatively impact, and that's a whole different story. But actually, in terms of skill acquisition and skill progression, are there things that we can do to try and help support positive psychological development along the way? And I truly believe that there is. I'm much more factual with the athletes that I work with in terms of discussing the difference between a fliffus and a Rudy out. What is the physical difference? The physical difference is the amount of which we tilt our body to create the extra twist rotation. If we talk about it and we're factual about it, we understand that if we do this with our body, we'll do a half out fliffus. And if we do something different with our body, that will create more twist. So again, it's something that we can explore, but again, research and find out what's right for you, what's right for your athletes and your environment. Lifestyle, the one that we least have impact about, and with regards to planning, again, this is about effective time management. If you're working with athletes that are at school, and they have come straight from school to training, have they had anything to eat that fuels their body to make sure that they've got appropriate energy levels to train? Have they had enough rest in between? Have they enough psychological switch off? So again, understanding what's happening in an athlete's everyday life is important in terms of how we plan our training program. So some key factors with regards to planning: we've got to know the level of our athletes and also their potential. We've got to analyse their current performance levels in terms of where they're currently at. We need to maybe consider things like previous competition results and things like how do we set targets in terms of how we're going to progress. Now that can be things like improving time of flight, increasing the accuracy from horizontal displacement, increasing the form scores that they get, and improving the actual quality of what they're doing. But it's really important that we understand all these different factors in planning. It also provides accountability on all levels. So if we set some targets and people don't meet those targets, we can review and try and find out why they haven't achieved those targets. So that leads me on to different sort of task and goal and ego or goal orientations. So when we're setting plans, do we understand the people that we're working with? Now, there's different types of goals when we're setting goals. We've got outcome and end goals. Now, this is something that we cannot control. So if we look at the last Olympic Games, for example, we look at the women's event. So Bryony got the silver medal. Now, did I say to Bryony, your goal is to get a silver medal at the Olympics? Or did we say your goal is to try and do the best routine that you can possibly do on the day? The goal was to try and do the best routine that you can do on the day, because the outcome goal is completely out of our control, especially in a sport where we've got judges and that are doing things to a code of points. It might be that our athletes don't make the depth of shape in their skill that maybe they made in training. So the judges won't give them the scores that we would hope that they would get because they didn't actually meet the requirements of the code of points. Nothing we can do about that. What we can do, though, in training is to talk about, actually, we need to get that depth of detail into that skill. We need to get the closed shape in that skill in order to try and meet the code of points. So we can set some targets within training. So that might be things like we've got to set certain targets for flexibility and range of movement, things that we can control, things that we can measure, and things that we can implement. So in terms of the training environment, when we look at different types of goals and environments, there's some different scenarios here. So when we talk about ego or task, ego might be a case of somebody who likes to win and somebody who is driven by achieving a medal or coming first. Or it could be that a coach is very much like, oh, yeah, my athlete's the best, they are the best. If we talk about task is about concentrating on the personal development of yourself. So we have different environments in terms of you could have an ego athlete that wants to win and I'm going to win. You could have an ego coach that's my athletes are going to be the best that they can be. You could have an athlete that is, yes, I'm the winner, I want to win. And you could have a coach that is very much more, actually, let's focus and concentrate on you improving you. You could have the opposite of that and have an athlete who is just quite simply, I just want to improve myself. I don't care what others are doing. I'm just going to be the best that I can be. And then you might have a coach that says, but I want you to be better than everybody else. Well, then you could have the scenario of a task athlete and a task coach that is quite simply concentrating on their improvement. Now, which is the best scenario in a training environment? The task and task. So focusing on the task of improvement as opposed to focusing on simply winning. Now, that's not saying that you don't want to have a winning mentality. Of course, you want people to want to achieve good things, but actually in the training environment, it's really important that we concentrate on the process of improvement in all those different areas that we've talked about today. So if we focus on the process and task of how to improve, hopefully the outcome goal will be a success one and they will win or they will achieve success. So key things to summarize, we need to identify and involve everybody in this process. That might be judges, it might be parents, it will be coaches, it would certainly be the athletes. Set some specific targets for people to improve by. Have individual athlete plans because we're all different and we learn different things and we all progress at different levels. And think about the bigger picture as opposed to quite simply what the here and now is. Think about where you want to be further down the line. And also, the most important thing is an athlete-centered and informed practice approach. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the purpose of it? And how will that benefit the people that we're working with? So let's have a quick look at some examples of a couple of plans before I finish. I'm just going to stop share for a second and then I'll reshare. So we're going to have a little look at a couple of different templates as examples, and I'll talk you through them. So I'm just going to share my screen again. So this is an example of a macro cycle. So this is a year plan. Now, I'll explain this. This was for one of my junior athletes who competed at world age level, a very successful year. She finished 6 world age group competitions in the individual and won synchro with her synchro partner. So they were world age group champions for synchro. Now, this is from a number of years ago, but you can see here that we have specific training periods. So at the top here, we have the year. So this was January 2015, February 2015. And then these coloured sections here, this is the weeks to competition. So we would have the different events here. So BCHQ1 stands for British Championships Qualification 1, British Championships Qualification 2, British Championships, World Age Group Championships. Then what I've put in here is the number of weeks, so almost a countdown to competitions. So we have 47 weeks until the World Age Championships, 35 weeks until British Championships, 22, 13, and 9. These are the different weeks. So it tells me, it gives me a map and a guide of what we need to do. And then I break it down quite simply. This is a younger athlete, so I kept it very, very simple in terms of trampoline specific, physical specific, psychological specific. And I broke that year plan, that macro cycle, into smaller mesocycles, which is medium term planning. So that would be 4 to 6 weeks of plans. So here you can see in this particular period of time, we were working on skill development and in terms of trying to step up to a higher level next year. So we weren't necessarily focusing on execution and perfection of skills. We were working on trying to get more complex skills. Okay, so when we're doing that, when we first learn skills, we know they won't be perfect. We have to learn them, we have to establish them, and we have to perfect them. So again, that was this period of time. Now, how that changes along the time that you can see here is as we're getting closer to competition, we've got to change what we do things. So during this period of time here, we have to maintain good performances and we have to perfect what we're doing in order to be ready for the competition. So again, the training changes from where it was several months ago to where it needs to be now in order to be peaking at top performance. So in terms of, I'm just going to share one more thing before I finish. In terms of how we might do some of that, we can set different goals. So we can set goals for different parts of the year, and that might be outcome goals, such as things like time of flight or execution that we want to see improvements by, or it could be certain competition goals as well in terms of understanding the athlete's ability level. Or it could be process goals in terms of things like improving flexibility, okay, completing number of routines, or sort of improving core strength or the quality or height of a skill, things that we can control in training. Just share screen once more. So in terms of planning, again, we need to think about all those different areas and we need to do things with informed practice. And sometimes we might need some help and support. So my biggest advice is opportunities, advice and support. Take all of them. Take all of them. Attend things like this with regards to what the UEG provide. Go to training camps if you can, because if you do that, you might end up like myself and have one of the most amazing moments of your life. Now, this is something where I'd like to thank so many people. There's too many people to thank that have helped me on my journey. I can name a few. Along the way, Jack Kelly was a legend and inspiration to me and still is. And in terms of my technical approach, we've had other people such as Tracy Whitaker-Smith, who is my mentor, who's the head national coach. And then there's people such as Luis, who's on here, Vladimir, Irina Karavaeva, like all of these people, just because I took the opportunity, I took the advice, and I took the support. So always feel, you know, we only know what we know. And if we need to know something more that we maybe don't know, don't be frightened of asking. So thank you very much for your time. And now I will hand back to Vladimir to open up for questions. Thank you very much. Oh, I think you're on mute, Vladimir.
I need to unmute. Thank you very much, Paul. It was really interesting to hear your presentation, to be a part of this session, and I hope all the participants have the same feeling. Basically, if you want to ask something, please use the Q&A section, not the chat section. But let's do. I have. Okay. Thank you, Mitch, for your evaluation, for your comment, and to everybody. If you want to ask Paul for something, please use this Q&A section.
Yes, thank you, Mitch, as well. Just I've never had the pleasure of working with Mitch, and he's a person that I've always wanted to work with, and our paths have never quite crossed. But such an exceptional coach and somebody who I hope to work with in the future.
Okay, we have first question. Paul, how do you plan for SNC? What is it?
Within strength and conditioning. So okay.
You need to read the question first, that the people who will watch the video after know also the question.
So the question is, how do you plan for S&C, so strength and conditioning, within your annual plan, such as volume, intensity, and what is your approach to training full routines throughout the year cycle? So really good question. Now, one of the things that is important to acknowledge is that over here in the UK, when athletes get to a certain level, they might have extra support in terms of a specific coach for strength and conditioning. But for most athletes, it's pretty much what we provide in the training environment, because they're not funded athletes. Now, one of the key things for that is considering things such as events that we need to peak for. So if you have somebody that is trying to compete for at world level or world age level towards the end of the year, the end of the season, you might need to then think, when is the right time to do overload training for the other areas such as strength and conditioning? Now, that would probably be after a rest and recovery position or point once they've completed that season. So they complete the season, rest and recovery time, then it might be the perfect time to overload. I'm going to say overload, to increase the intensity of strength and conditioning training. Now, when that happens, what you will probably see is a decline in technical accuracy, and there might be more fatigue to the muscles and things like that. So the technical excellence of training during that period would differ. So it very much depends on the athlete's year schedule in terms of what they're doing, in terms of how they sort of plan the year with what you're doing. Now, for some countries, that might be quite difficult if you have events all the way through the year. So again, it's thinking about, well, where do you want to achieve, and where do you want to get to? What's the overall end goal? But in terms of when we're intensifying one area, another area needs to sort of lessen, because otherwise we're completely overloading the athletes too much, and that's when we get things like burnout. So my advice is, look at the competition calendar, or look at the events calendar of what they've got to do, and then look at the period of time which would be right to increase the intensity of maybe strength and conditioning to help with being able to jump higher or being able to be stronger and be able to cope with the different impacts of the trampoline, and then think about how we then ease that training to merge into more technical intensity. So I hope that answers your question there.
Okay, the next question is, how are you modifying your planning in light of COVID? Short and long term, considering the uncertainty.
So I think it's fair to say that we don't know what the future has for us now, and it's the most uncertain time that we've ever had as coaches. One thing that we can do is we can use this platform to try and keep people motivated. So it might be that we're focusing more on the psychological development and the non-technical aspects of what we do, such as physical preparation, psychological preparation. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but what we do know is that at some point we will go back to some sort of normality, like society will resume and we will get back to competitions. But how we plan during this time is that we have to change and adapt as we need to. So if we know that our season is not happening, for example, the perfect time to make people stronger physically, to improve on flexibility. So if we know that so as an example, last year, all of our events were cancelled. So all we could focus on was trying to motivate participants to improve themselves personally. Now, again, we can't do that on the trampoline, but there's, like we've identified in these planning areas, there's not just technical, there's tactical, physical, psychological, and lifestyle. So how can we flip things around and change things to focus on those areas to improve? And that's what we did over here, is that we've changed, rather than focusing on what we can't do, it's focusing on what we can do and what we can improve.
Okay, thank you, Paul. The next question is, Paul, can we get some examples of plans sent to us, especially for athletes just under elite level, 7-10 years, 12-13, 13-15, and 15-18 years?
I'm quite happy to share some of my plans. I tend to work now only with older athletes. So I work with senior athletes as opposed to younger athletes. But in terms of the 7 to 10 years, again, I'm more than happy to share some of the things that we do. Now, that might not be trampoline specific. That might be some information with regards to things such as fundamentals and physical literacy, something which I teach quite a lot of at university. So certainly between the ages of 7 and 10 years, I've been to many different countries and coached. And one of the things that I always look at is how the athletes walk. Now, you might think that's completely ridiculous, but I'll look at like how they walk into the sports hall or into the gym. I'll look at like their foot placement, their knee alignment, because I can guarantee that that will probably transfer onto the trampoline. I almost guarantee that that will happen. So when I worked in, I'll not name certain countries, but I worked in a certain country, and the population predominantly wear flip-flops. So they wear non-supported footwear because it's a hot climate all the time. So they don't wear trainers or supported footwear. Now, when they got onto the trampoline, their feet were turned out, just like they were in their flip-flops, in their beach shoes. Now, that then impacted on their knees, and then that impacted on how they jumped in the trampoline. So not surprising that they didn't have very much success in trampoline, because their physical development, probably from a young age of 7 to 10 years, they'd learn lots of habits, or a different word for habits, lots of things that were physically not supporting progression in trampoline. So hopefully that explains, but yeah, I'm more than happy to share some things.
Okay. I would like to add as well, I would guide you also to FIG age group development program, what is available on the FIG website under the education. And there are also many information about about the progression and the development of the gymnasts, also related to ages, etc., etc. But anyway, I think your question was really good, and we will talk with Paul if there is some chance to share his experience with you the other way. Okay. And next question is from Mitch. How much more physical training was you using with your elite athletes in the time during lockdowns?
So they went to doing, so we had a complete lockdown last year from March through to June. So there was no trampoline, no technical training. So athletes weren't permitted to train at all. So it was completely 100% physical training. So there was a lot of work around physical preparation, flexibility. So we switched everything to be fitness and well-being as opposed to technical training, because we couldn't train. When we came back into training, there was a lot of research by our physiotherapists and by our medical teams to inform us about the impacts on things like the Achilles and the foot. So we had a very slow developmental progression back into training. So starting off jumping very, very low, because the athletes, and this is something to point out, the athletes that had been allowed to come back into training under the elite training program, physically they felt brilliant because they've been doing so much physical preparation. So they thought they didn't feel any different. So in their head, they could come back to the trampolines and do everything straight away. However, to simulate the impact of the force of maximum depression when the trampoline is sunken all the way down, the pressure that puts on the Achilles alone, you can't simulate that in any other way other than trampoline. So we had to progress the athletes in a way that they probably felt that they could do more, but we had to do it slowly. So yeah, the physical training was much more, was the only thing that we could do during sort of the lockdown period.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, could you share any experiences that work to have an athlete peak at the right time? For example, training camps at certain amount of time before a competition, training load, etc., etc.
Yeah, so we used to do things in quite a different way, mainly because that's just how I'd been trained. And so I might say, okay, before competition, and this is a mistake that I made, I would want you to be able to do 10 compulsory routines, 10 voluntary routines. If you're doing that amount of routines just prior to a competition, you're going to be having exhausted athletes. So again, that wasn't the best way, but it's something, again, which I thought was the right thing, but then actually it was looking at, right, okay, what do we need to do? The athletes need to know that they can complete their routine at any time, any place, before a competition. They need to have that confidence. So how can we do that? Well, actually what we can do is we can do more numbers of routines, maybe 5-6 weeks before competition. So the quality might not be as good because they're doing more of them, so therefore they're going to be more tired. Then as we get into closer to competition, we might taper or refine that. So there's less numbers of routines, but we expect higher quality of those routines. So again, it's a full completion of routines, but again, if you've done enough of, we call it putting money in the bank. You put the money in the bank and you create some savings so that then you can spend the money at the end. And that's the same with the routines. We put the routines in, we get the routines solid and completed earlier on, and then as we're getting 5, 4, 3 weeks into competition, we do less numbers of routines, but with higher quality. So hopefully that helps you. But in terms of things like training camps and things like that, you want to have a good solid sort of 4 to 5 weeks of consistent training going into an event, where you're focusing on that athlete sort of doing the best that they can for that event, as opposed to sort of sticking in the training camp 2 weeks before and altering everything that they're doing. They need consistency going into those events. So that would be my advice.
Okay, thank you. For the moment, last question. Working with senior athletes, planning is very much a partnership. When working with elite athletes, how much should be driven by the performer and how much should be by the coach? 50-50, 60-40?
Really good question, and something which, again, depends on the athlete as well. It can depend on the knowledge of the athlete. It can depend on the ability level of the athlete. But athletes should be involved in that planning process, and especially senior athletes. Now, I had a conversation with somebody from an entirely different sport yesterday, who's a head national coach. Again, he's a very experienced coach, and we were talking about how things change. So if we look at almost like a seesaw, yeah. So we have one person pushing, and the other person drops down, and then they push back, and we have this seesaw. Now, when we first start working with athletes, very much the knowledge and information has to come from us as coaches, because they don't have any knowledge or information of the sport. So we've got to guide them and help them. As they progress and develop to become senior athletes, they should and probably will know the sport very, very well. They'll understand the sport just as much as we understand it. And they'll probably understand themselves much better than we can ever understand them. So involving them in the process is really important. Now, for example, the senior athletes that I work with, it's much more sit down, discuss and plan, and I want them to be the ones driving the program. So I would say it's more 60% them and 40% me, or even less than that, actually. They would have much more input, and then I would be more or less checking that what they're doing is right, and I would challenge them if maybe I thought something wasn't right. As an example, if we have an athlete that says, right, I don't want to do any full routines before competition, that would ring an alarm in my head, and I would think that's not right, and so I need to challenge the athlete over that. So, but hopefully we have educated the athletes well enough throughout their progression that they would understand the needs of what they have to do in order to achieve success. So yeah, at the very start, it's more heavily influenced by us as coaches, but then as time progresses and they become senior athletes, their involvement and input is much more, and we're more a guide, a guardian, a support to help them achieve what they hopefully can achieve.
Okay, do we have some more questions? No, at the moment, this is all. If you don't have any other question, Paul, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us, with the participants, with all the people who will see the video after the webinar, because if I did everything well, we will have a good video and we will put it on the YouTube and European Gymnastics website again. Okay. This is the step ahead. Now, some advertisement for the next webinars we will organize for you on Saturday, 8 May. It will be a roundtable with the European Gymnastics Training Camps coaching experts. They will try to share their experience and knowledge and some points they collected during the training camps with you, with the participants, and you will have more chance to talk with more people who will participate, with more experts. The next one on 30th of May, preparation for competition in difficult time for trampoline gymnastics. Again, this is the topic for all disciplines, like the training camp roundtable, and it will be provided by Ana Bispo Ramirez, who is a Portuguese National Olympic Committee psychologist and comes from the psychology environment. And the last webinar in this set, in this package, will be as we used to do dedicated to one of our disciplines. Now it will be tumbling, and the experts will be Alan Lavelle from Great Britain and Christoph Willerton, top tumbling gymnast, European and world tumbling champion. Okay. So, Paul, thank you once more for coming to us, to sharing your knowledge with us, and also thank you all who participated at the webinar. Wishing you good time. Please stay healthy, stay safe, and take care. See you next time. Goodbye.